my name is Natalie. So the issue of abolishing the mandatory capital punishment has been argued all this while. So let's see what my friends think about the capital punishment. Hey Joel, what do you think of the mandatory capital punishment?
I think it's good. An eye for an eye, let's catch that guy.
Alright, thank you.
Bye bye.
Hey Samuel, what do you think of the capital punishment?
I think we should still keep the mandatory death penalty to uphold the justice.
Alright, thank you. Hey! Hey, Vicky, what do you think of the mandatory capital punishment?
Well, I actually think that it's morally wrong to do so, and everyone actually deserves a second chance, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Would you like to ask Jing Hui as well?
Jing Hui! Hey!
Yes, hi.
What do you think of the mandatory capital punishment?
I think it's not relevant nowadays because we used to have this capital punishment and over in the ancient time, right? So I don't think we should have mandatory death sentence now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so as we know, everyone has different views of capital punishment. So whether to abolish it or not, this issue has been raised because of the Pakatan Harapan's manifesto. So let's go into details of what capital punishment is.
Hi, my name is Samuel. Today I'm going to talk about the reason to keep mandatory death penalty. First, the mandatory death penalty can act as a deterrent to the public. Before I proceed, we will have to define the terms terrorism. Terrorism is defined as the unlawful use of violence and intimidations, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. An example for this will be the Lahad Datu invasion in 2013. The 2013 Lahad Datu invasion was a military conflict that started on 11 February and completely ended on 24 March. The terrorists arrived by boat in Lahad Datu district in Sabah, Malaysia, from Seminole Island, Tawi-Tawi in southern Philippines. The terrorists called themselves the Royal Security Force of Sultanate Sulu and North Borneo. They claim that they are the owner of the land and want to take it back. During this incident, they killed innocent civilians and hold hostages as the model to negotiate with the Malaysian government. The invasion and their terrorism act caused the innocent life being sacrificed, where 6 civilians and 10 Malaysian security force were killed by the terrorists. This incident brought devastating consequences to the victims and their families, causing young children to lose their parents. The terror attack also put the nation's security at risk. As a result, it deeply affected the image of Malaysia and disrupt the economies of Sabah, which strongly depends on tourism. So, imposing a mandatory death penalty on these terrorists will be fairly adequate. Moving on to my next point, which is the principle of an eye for an eye. An eye for an eye principle is probably the most suitable way to punish a criminal as for those who have committed an indictable offense. For example, intentional manslaughter, terror attack, and hostage holding that result to death. By putting this criminal to death does in fact give some relief to the victims' families and provide some sense of justice. Before I move to my next point, I would like to ask, why should the mandatory death penalty still be kept? The reason is to prevent them from causing future harm to the public. A mandatory death penalty can sufficiently discontinue them from starting a new attack to the public. With mandatory death penalty provisions, it could curb the evil from becoming stronger and cause greater harm to the world. For example, the 9/11 attack of the World Trade Center in the United States, which resulted in 2,996 people killed, injured over 6,000, and cost at least $10 billion in infrastructure and property damage. The seriousness of this event further affirmed the need to keep mandatory death penalty. Last but not least, there is a huge concern that if the evil is kept in the prison, they can still get in touch with the outer world and monitor the activities of the groups and organize a new attack. As no prison system is perfect and preventing them from connecting with outer world. As a summary, in order to completely clear the harm, a mandatory death penalty is the best solution.
So one of the advantages of having death sentence in Malaysia is to act as a deterrent which can reduce the number of criminal offences. According to the words of Sir James Stephen, no other punishment deters men so effectually from committing crimes as the punishment of death. In any secondary punishment, however terrible, there is hope, but death is death. Its terrors cannot be described more possibly. In this sense, capital punishment is effective ways to reduce the number of criminal offences as the fear of losing their life. So, death penalty was introduced by the government under Dangerous Drug Ordinance 1952. For example, mandatory death sentence had charged under Section 39B, Dangerous Drug Act 1952 in the recent case of Sharin bin Abu Bakar against prosecutor in 2019. In this case, the appellant was convicted and serving death sentence for drug trafficking. So this shows that Malaysia takes a very tough stance and show no tolerance in certain crimes. In this way, potential criminal will think twice before breaking the law. Second, an executed death sentence can give the society an absolute guarantee that the killer will never kill again. There have been countless cases which show that a convict sentenced to life imprisonment had attacked other inmates, prison guards, and other people as well. There's an example of a guy named Wong Jing Hui, who was one of the most dangerous characters in Malaysia during the 1970s. He led his gang to commit a string of violent armed robbery that netted them close to $1 million in cash. In 1980, he was charged under firearm possession, but while he was in the jail, he attacked 2 prison wardens and seriously injuring one of them. On the New Year's Day of 1981, he tried to escape from Kuru jail, but in the process of escaping the jail, he seriously injuring 3 prison wardens and only surrendered in the process when he seriously injured himself. After all, he was finally executed in 1981, leaving no more worries to the society. This case couldn't emphasize enough that mandatory death sentence must be applied to certain criminals because locking them in prison is not the suitable way. There was also cases where the notorious killer named Ted Bundy, who murdered over 30 of women on a rampage that took him across 7 states in the US during the 1970s. Ted Bundy had escaped from jail twice and even managed to kill 3 more people in his second time of escaping, in which one of the victims was only 12 years old. He had executed by electric chair in 1989, where hundreds of people gathered outside the courthouse to celebrate his death. One of the victims' mother said that for everything he did to the girls, the strangulation, humiliating and torturing their bodies, she felt that death sentence is too good for him. This even shows that death sentence might not be sufficient to bring closure for the ordeal of victims and victims' families. Life in prisons indicate that the criminals is still around to haunt the victims, whereas a death penalty brings finality to the horrible chapters of the victim's memory. If Ted Bundy was executed after his first crime, he would never have the chance to kill the last 3 victims.
Hi, my name is Vicky. So I will be talking about the disadvantages of having mandatory death penalty. So first of all, it does not deter criminals. Well, people often assume that due to the presence of death penalty, people are less likely to commit crimes as they know the consequences of doing so. However, there are many studies around the world which have shown that there is no credible evidence that death penalty is a great deterrent. For example, according to the FBI Unified Crime Report, it states that the murder rate in the United States with the death penalty is 48% to 101% higher compared to the states without the death penalty. Another example that is closer to us will be Hong Kong and Singapore. So Hong Kong and Singapore have both these countries have very similar crime rates. However, in Hong Kong there is no death penalty, while in Singapore the death penalty has been actively used until today. So one of the reasons why the death penalty might not deter criminals is because Most of the times, the crimes happen in a moment of passion. The criminals do not think forward, or they rarely consider the consequences of their actions for doing so. As one scholar notes, no one who kills by permanent or temporary insanity through jealousy, retaliation, rape, drug addiction, alcoholism, or a feeling of no way out of rage, think of the death penalty the moment when they're committing the offenses. Well, death penalty does not link to a safe society. So it means that having the death penalty in our society does not mean that our society will be completely safe. It also means that abolishing the death penalty does not equals to a dangerous society as well. Other than that, innocent people may be killed. So all the justice systems around the world all make mistakes. Justice systems are never perfect. All of them have flaws. The saddest thing about capital punishment is that there are unfortunate instances of people end up being executed for the crimes that they did not commit. And this has happened before. There are several cases of people end up being wrongly framed for the crimes that, such as murdering, drug trafficking, and end up being condemned to death. However, the new evidence or the truth comes up like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or even 40 years later, and by that time, they have already been executed. So what do? They can never be brought back to life anymore. So in the case of the Texas man named Cameron Whittingham, he was executed back in 2004 because he was convicted for setting up a fire that had killed 3 of his daughters. However, followed by his execution, new evidence came up that showed that he actually did not set up the fire. However, it all came way too late. He has already been executed. So in the famous Malaysian murder trial of the Beauty Queen, which actually happened in the 80s, which actually happened under the federal highway, so the main prosecution witness came forward 4 days later after the conviction of Mr. Kadikatsu, saying that he had lied. Then, luckily, Mr. Kadikatsu was then lucky enough to be free from the sentence to death. So overall, witnesses, prosecutors, judges all make mistakes. We are all humans. If all people who are convicted will be executed, many people will be put to death even if they do not deserve to be. Last but not least, everyone has their rights to life. So according to the European Convention of Human Rights, Section 1, Article 2.1, the summary of the meaning is, everyone's right to life shall be protected by law. So no death sentence, no capital punishment should be imposed on them because it actually violates their rights to life. Same goes to the Article 5.1 of the Malaysian Federal Constitution. It guarantees right to life and liberty to every individual. That guarantee means that you cannot impose a punishment that is cruel and arbitrary on anyone. So everyone has their inalienable human rights, and by sentencing them to death or executing them actually violates their right to life. I understand that people want the criminals to be accountable for their actions. However, the state cannot give lives what rights give to take any. Why the judges who have the power to deprive a person's right to life? Who are they to do so? So, the state is actually using a murder to punish someone who has committed a murder. So what's the difference of the state and the murder? It just continues the cycle of violence and it violates everyone's right to life.
Hi, my name is Joel. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 countries that maintain the mandatory death penalty. The first country I'm going to talk about is our neighbours, Singapore. There are 32 offences that could potentially lead to a death sentence in Singapore, with 4 of these offences given mandatory death penalty. The 4 offences are namely murder, drug trafficking, terrorism, and possession of unauthorized firearms, ammunition, and explosives. Individuals sentenced to death penalty in Singapore will be given free legal representation under the Legal Association for Capital Offences. In 2012, there was an amendment to the death penalty law in Singapore. This amendment ruled that the courts can now decide to impose life imprisonment instead of mandatory death penalty. This is the case specifically for drug traffickers. These individuals must only play the role of a courier or had a mental disability that impaired their judgment of the severity of their actions. The execution itself is done by hanging and is normally carried out on Friday at dawn. The date of the execution is usually not revealed in advance, where families of the death row inmate only inform on the Monday of the week of the execution. Families of foreign death row inmates are given slightly more time for them to make visitation arrangements. The actual execution is carried out in a way that death is quick, and only doctors and prisoner officers are allowed to watch. According to Amnesty International, more than 400 prisoners have been hanged in Singapore's Changi prison since 1991. In recent years, the number of executions seems to have decreased, but not to the point that there are none. Most of the executions are as a result of bringing convicted for drug trafficking or murder offences. Some high-profile executions include Khu Jeving and Nguyen Thuong Van. A survey by the Straits Times in 2006 reported that 96% of Singaporeans are for the death penalty. Another poll made 10 years later by Reaching Everyone for Active Citizenry reported that 80% of 1,160 Singaporeans are for the death penalty. The Singapore government takes a firm stance in retaining the death penalty, especially in relation to its war against drugs. The government believes that the death penalty has been a strong deterrent and is good in keeping the drug situation in Singapore under control. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong reiterated that the penalty is approved by Singapore's cohabitants, which allows Singapore to reduce the drug problem. On the other hand, the Singapore Law Society expressed in their report that was submitted to the Ministry of Law that the mandatory death sentence should be made discretionary and that judges in courts should be given the choice to impose the death penalty only when they deem appropriate. The next country that I want to talk about is Brunei. No executions have occurred in Brunei since the country gained its independence in 1984. The last known execution in Brunei was in the year 1957. However, a review on cases stated that the courts in Brunei can still apply mandatory death sentences upon defendants that are found guilty. Under the Criminal Procedure Code, the judge is required to submit to the Sultan a report explaining why the death penalty should or should not be imposed on that individual. Individuals below the age of 18 at the time of the crime, pregnant women, and the intellectually disabled community are exempted from the death penalty. Methods of execution in Brunei include stoning and hanging. Brunei enacted a new Sharia Penal Code back in April of 2014 with phased implementation. The first phase applied to Tazir offences, such as failure to attend Friday prayers. The second phase applies to higher severity hudud and qisas offences, including same-sex relations. In April of 2019, Brunei prescribed stoning as a method of execution for same-sex sexual relations, but was later not executed after pressure and protest from the international community.
Hi, my name is Natalie. I'm going to talk about two Commonwealth countries that has abolished the capital punishment. So one of them is actually New Zealand. So the first execution happened in New Zealand was in 1842 and the last one happened was in 1957. So there were 83 court executions for murder and one for treason happened in 1842 and until 1957. So it has always been the policy for Labour Party to actually abolish the capital punishment. When Labour Party took place in the office in 1935, death sentence were actually reduced. But in 1950, the National Party then back in power. They restored it, and from 1951 to 1957, there was 18 convictions for murder and 8 executions. So in 1958 to 1960, it was again made inoperative by the Labour Party. So in 1961, a free vote of Parliament, the 10 members from the national government voted with the oppositions to abolish the capital punishment. And the abolition of the Death Penalty Act of 1989 come into effect in 1989 to abolish all capital punishment in New Zealand. The country that I'm going to talk about is Australia. So capital punishment have been part of the Australia since British settlement. So during the 19th century, crimes could carry a death sentence was ship stealing, forgery, sexual assault, murder, manslaughter and burglary. So Queensland was the first to abolish in 1982 and New South Wales abolished in 1985. So in 1973, the Death Penalty Abolition Act of the Commonwealth of Section 4 states that no one should be liable to the death penalty. So in order to stop anyone from bringing back the death penalty, in 2010 of March, the Federal Parliament has passed laws to stop anyone from bringing back the death penalty. So the reasons why Australia against death penalty, so it's actually very close to what we usually think, which is the breach of human rights, which is the right to life. As we have mentioned earlier before, that everyone has a chance to live. So it's not the decision of the states to stop anyone from living. So secondly, there's no persuasive evidence to show that the death penalty actually deters the potential offenders. Ideologically, we'll think that yes, it does deter the potential offenders, but there's no data in reality saying that it actually deters the offenders. So the last but not least, it will be no criminal justice system is perfect. So it's because we are all humans that we make mistakes. That's why the risk of executing the innocent can never be eliminated. So we hereby submit that we agree with Pakatan Harapan's manifesto in abolishing the capital punishment. The reason being is because it does not deter anyone, and at least no one has shown on evidence that it does. Second point is that government engages in countless omissions in killing the innocents. The third one is that ultimate goal for the courts is always to rehabilitate the offenders. It's never to punish someone. Thank you.